What's up, everybody? I hope y'all are ready for another mandate. We had a brief week off, but we are back with another episode. Today, I am chatting with Kevin Fitzpatrick. We're going to talk about being vulnerable and how that is the cornerstone for growth. Talk about his personal journey with masculinity and mental health, and really how he learned about having ADHD and the impact that that had on him growing up. He's been working in men's work for over 30 years. We'll talk about what he's learned through that and his trends. We'll get in a little bit about the young adult men that he's working with in his practice, some themes that he's seeing there and what he really enjoys about it, as well as the work that he does with Victories of the Heart or Victories for Men and what those weekends are really like. So Kevin has a life mission to empower through healing. And that's something that has evolved both from having a father who is a physician and having to work on his own healing himself. So he's a licensed clinical social worker and has spent the last 40 years in the mental health field. Really cool journey. Has been full-time in psychotherapy practice since 1989. He's had a daily meditation practice for over 25 years, which is just wild. He's a yoga practitioner, but he is recovering from a knee injury, so we'll talk about that a little bit. His wife and he have been married for over 40 years, which is another amazing milestone. And he's raised 2 adult sons into great men as well. So he got involved in men's work in 1987 and has been involved ever since. So with that, let's jump in and go hang out with Kevin.
Welcome to The Mandate, a show featuring intimate conversations about men's mental health, masculinity, and identity. We bring you stories to inspire you, experts to guide you, and the tools you need to become the man you truly want to be. It's time to sit back, relax, and open up. Live from the Mandate Studio in Austin, Texas, here's your host, Adam Hoffman.
All right, Kevin, thank you so much for joining me today on The Mandate. I'm excited to dig in today. How are you doing?
Well, I too am excited, and thank you for inviting me, Adam. I've been looking forward to this, and so I'm happy to be here. I'm doing pretty well. I've had a busy day with a fair amount of stress, and not sure how deeply you want me to dig into how am I, but I'll say that. Like many people, I have COVID fatigue. It's been a long ass year. Um, and in addition to, you know, g- going through that, I had a knee replacement surgery back in um, November. And that has been an ordeal. It's been a really hard. Uh, it, it has limited me from doing things that I love doing, like yoga. Uh, and I'm an active person, and I've had to be pretty inactive. Um, Good news is I'm kind of emerging from. I was depressed. I've been depressed about not only about COVID. I moved out of my office of 33 years because of COVID, so that was a loss. I lost my health club, my yoga community there, and then superimposed over that is the knee surgery and loss of activity. So yeah, it's been a it's been a tough go. I'm happy to say though that I'm emerging from that funk and got discharged from my outpatient physical therapy last Friday. So that's a milestone after 45 sessions. Uh,
Wow.
and uh, and I was able to ride my motorcycle for the first time this season on Sunday.
Oh, nice. That had to have felt good.
It felt terrific. I wasn't sure whether I was going to be able to ride, because of the knee, whether I could throw a leg over or whether I'd be able to put my right foot on the footboard. But I was able to, and I came back and I said to my wife, I said, I feel like I'm alive again.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And I appreciate your openness with how you're really doing right now. And as much as I am exhausted talking about COVID, I am glad that you brought it up because there's been something about these last couple of weeks, man. I have been feeling that COVID fatigue. I feel like more so than I have through other parts of this last year that we've been in. I mean, it
Hmm.
talked to a couple people this week and it's just like, yeah, really weighing on me. And I wondered how much of it is because it feels like the end is almost in sight. I know that
Yeah,
Texas put out a notification that as of this coming Monday, vaccines will be available to anybody who wants them. And,
great.
if that isn't a big signal, I don't know what is, but I think at the same time, it's this apprehension of, well, this time last year, we were kind of telling ourselves that it was only going to be a couple of months. And if we just wore masks and stayed inside, it would just go away. And that
Yeah.
wasn't the case. Like, is that going to happen again? It's like, can't let myself totally see it yet. And it's just exhausting.
Yeah, I think part of it is maybe catching glimpses of the finish line. People are getting vaccinated. Spring is happening. We're through the winter. The stats are going down in terms of incidence of illness and death and hospitalization, et cetera. Um, but I love the saying that I'm hearing a lot these days of "let's not trip at the finish line."
Mm, I think that sums it up really well.
We still got to wear masks. Please talk to your governor.
I know that's the funny thing too. I've talked to a number of friends who are in California and they're like, "What the heck? You guys drop your mask mandate and things are going in the opposite direction that they are in California where we've got full mask mandate." This feels like something that as much as we understand, we still don't fully understand it, and that is just a wacky place to be for humans.
Yeah. Well, Anthony Fauci's my guy. I listen to what he says and I do what he tells me.
Same, same. We're
Hmm.
in that same boat. That's why we mask up. Studio still requires masks, all that stuff. And when we see people not doing it, we get that little like, really? Did you get the vaccine? Is that why you're doing it? Or are you just doing it because you really just don't give a shit? So, anyways, that's enough on the COVID front. Yeah, so you've had a lot going on. What I wanted to ask you as part of what you were sharing is today. I know you were mentioning that you had a lot going on in the practice, and I'm curious. Do you have any kind of daily routines or rituals that helps you kind of stay connected and stay checked in, keep that energy up so you can be that present for your clients?
Yes. Answer is yes, I do. The the first thing I do in the morning when I get up after I pee is I meditate for 20 minutes. And that's a perfect way to start my day. It does center me. It sets my day spinning in the right direction. uh, I've been doing that for many years, and it's just it's lifestyle now. It's just something that I do, so that definitely helps start my day out right. um, this morning I was able to do a little bit of yoga, a little bit of stretching before I started seeing clients, uh, and another kind of beginning of the day ritual is having coffee with my wife in the living room, and we, read the newspaper and chat a little bit, and that's part of the routine too, and that's maybe just as important as the meditation and the yoga.
I love that. And is there anything like throughout the day you do in between sessions to kind of keep yourself grounded and keep the energy in a good spot?
Uh, well, my on busy days, my day is very regimented because I do 50-minute sessions. I start on the hour and I end at 10 minutes before the hour, or I try to. Usually I go a little over. So I have anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes in between sessions. So one thing that's really important for me to do, particularly because of my knee, is get up and walk. Because if I go a couple hours without walking, that knee stiffens up and I'm hobbling. Uh, so it's kind of it's I have a routine. I get up, I walk, I take a leak. I try and eat a little bit, throughout the day, small portions, uh, I have my drill. What I what I do after a session is I make a progress note on the session that I just had, and then I read the progress note from last week of the person who I'm going to see next. So I can cram all that stuff into 5 minutes. It's a little crazy, but it's a rhythm I've developed over the years that works for me.
Yeah, and you've been at it for a while, that's for sure.
A long
And
time, yeah.
yeah, and I definitely want to get into what you've learned in your practice and your experience with men's work, but I'd love to start by hearing about your personal journey with mental health and masculinity. And I have to be totally honest, I didn't expect you to drop the D word early on when you said that you were feeling a little depressed. I don't think that people share that stuff as freely. And so I appreciated you calling it out. But what has been your personal journey with
Hmm.
masculinity and mental health?
Well, I'll get back to the D word a little further on when we talk about the men's work, because the men's work has helped me to develop relationships with men with whom I can be completely transparent and say how I really am. But we'll get to that. Um, I was born in the Eisenhower era, post World War II, in the nifty 50s, and grew up in a upper middle class upbringing. My dad was a physician, um, and one thing that's about my history, vis-a-vis mental health, that's pretty telling is a little vignette. Um, um, when I was, I don't know, four, probably about four, my parents went off somewhere. Our babysitter was the mother of a friend of my dad's. So she was an adult woman with, adult, had raised adult kids. When my parents came back, I was tied to a tree in the front yard.
I don't know if I should be laughing, but I just had a really
Well,
funny picture of young Kevin on a tree.
yeah, well, it's funny and it's not funny, and that's, um, and so if something like that happened today, the woman would be arrested and pilloried.
Yeah.
But um, back then, it was a different era, and my parents understood, because guess who was hyperactive? Guess who had ADHD? I was a moving machine, uh, and that is something that I didn't really come to understand or know about myself until decades later. I think I came to that in my 40s. But school was hard for me. Um, Difficulty, it's a classic, diagnostic criteria. Difficulty focusing, difficulty maintaining attention, restlessness, um, distractibility. And so school was tough for me, grade school, uh, high school, and a good bit of college. Though I think the maturation of my brain by college time helped somewhat. But that was those experiences, shaped me, and I it led me to think that there was something wrong with me, that I wasn't smart, that I was dumb. Uh, in parent-teacher conferences, my parents would always come back saying, "Well, the teacher said that you just need to try harder,"
Hmm.
which was pretty discouraging uh,
Hmm.
to hear. Uh, so yeah, so that's a very significant part of my growing up and my mental health, and didn't discover that until after I had started meditating years later, and my mindfulness developed and my self observation skills improved, and I started noticing myself and how I operated and how I did things, and I went, God, this is crazy. What are you doing?
Hmm.
Uh, and um, so I kind of got curious about that. Another thing was that, I'm a therapist by profession. I also noticed that I was missing the diagnosis in people who had ADHD. Um, and the reason being, I had it and I didn't know that I had it. So it's like having a blind spot for that. Uh, so yeah, that was kind of revealing.
I bet. I bet. So you're an adult practicing in clinical settings, and the blind spot is you have this. You're not able to diagnose it for others because, well, for the reasons that you just outlined. What kind of flipped the switch? What turned the corner for you?
Um, well, as I said, one was from, because of my meditation practice, I became more kind of aware, or my self-observation improved. I realized the kind of crazy way I went about doing things, kind of this, um, uber multitasking, and uh, I don't remember a moment, but uh, uh, when it started to become more clear to me, and I started putting some of the things together, it's like I know that I'm not stupid, but performing academically had always been difficult for me. And then I was tied to a tree by the babysitter, and those things all kind of came together, and it was like an aha moment.
Mm,
So I started educating myself about it, and, reading books like Driven to Distraction and Answers to Distraction, and went and visited with a psychiatrist friend of mine, and have, worked with some, stimulant medications on and off over the years. And so that's kind of how that all evolved.
got it. Yeah, it's so fascinating how I feel like a lot of this mental health stuff, even today that we're dealing with, is almost like we go through life thinking like, "Oh, this is just normal. Like, doesn't everybody
Right.
deal with this?" And in some cases now, everybody literally is dealing with this stuff. But other times it's people have probably dealt with it at some point in time, but we just kind of genericize it or think that there's nothing of it. When in fact there's a whole lot out there that we could be doing to support ourselves and to help ourselves. So
Yeah.
is there anything beyond ADHD that, came up for you as you were growing up?
Um, Well, I think I probably I know clinically that there's a high correlation, or what we call comorbidity, between ADHD and depression. And I think that there were periods in my childhood when I was depressed, and then later on, some in my adulthood, a pretty significant you know uh, period of depression. So, those two things often go together, and that's certainly been the case for me.
And do we know why those two things usually go hand in hand? Is there any research out there about it?
I'm sure there is. I'm not familiar with it. I can't answer that question. I don't know. It probably has something to do with, our neurochemistry and our, brain development. But, but I think, uh, no one in my family had, other than myself, had ADHD. But I think my father suffered from depression. I know he got pretty severely depressed after my mom died.
Mm,
Um, but even prior to that, I suspect that that he experienced some depression, not quite as severe as after his wife's death, but so there's a factor of heredity and genetics factored in there.
yeah. What made you want to get into social work and psychotherapy and the work that you're in today?
When I went to college, and I was happy to have gotten into college. My academic pedigree was not stellar, uh, um, but I got into a good, small Midwestern liberal arts college and took a liberal arts curriculum. As part of that, I took a psychology class and, introduction to psychology, which I did not have in high school. And boy, I liked it. I said, this is interesting. And so I took another psych course and I liked that too. And I took another psych course and I liked that too. So, lo and behold, I became a psych major and graduated with a bachelor's degree in psychology. And then my first full-time job out of college was in a psychiatric hospital uh, on an adolescent unit, inpatient adolescent unit. So that's kind of where I, cut my teeth professionally, and I got a lot of reinforcement, from the doctors and the nurses and the people that I worked with that I had a knack. Kevin, you're really good with these kids. You have a natural kind of gift to do this, and that kind of reinforced something that I was feeling anyway. And one of my mentors was a social worker, and I wanted to be like him. So I applied to graduate school in social work and became a social worker.
And the rest is history.
Well, imitation, as they say, is the highest form of flattery.
Yeah, for sure. Well,
So from
when we
then on, it was working in psychiatric settings, both inpatient and outpatient, for the ensuing years until I went into full-time private practice.
Yeah, it's incredible. I don't think, at least now, you don't really hear of as many people who major in something and then that they stick with that for their entire career, unless of course we're talking about a doctor or a lawyer, in which case now it seems like that's even being switched up even more.
Yeah.
So when you and I chatted originally, one thing that stood out to me was that you have been involved with men's work for as long as I've been alive. And that means that I have a whole lot to learn from you tonight about your experience over the past 30 plus years with men's work. So I'd just love to know, one, how did you get involved with it? And what have been
Hmm.
some of your biggest ahas along the way?
Yeah. Well, the guy that I referred to as a mentor of mine, he and a friend of his put together this men's weekend. This was back in the late '80s, and um, their female clients and colleagues were saying, "Why don't you guys do something for men? Men need to learn more about how to talk about their feelings and be in relationship. So do something." So they put together this weekend that was Friday night, all day Saturday, and half a day on Sunday. Uh, Back in those days, it was called the Men's Room, uh,
Oh my
which
God, I love that.
a
Paul didn't
lot
tell me that. That's a great name.
a lot of people get a chuckle out of that, Uh, but and since then, it's evolved into Victories, a not-for-profit called Victories for Men. So anyway, uh, this guy, Buddy Portugal was his name. They were doing these weekends, and he kept encouraging me to come and come on, Kevin, this is good. You like it, and I didn't want to do it. It was scary to think about doing it, and so eventually I bit the bullet. And I had been in therapy more than once before, and been involved in a lot of personal growth. Um, Activities through the '70s and '80s. But when I went through that weekend, um, uh, the experience that I had and the healing that I experienced in a circle of men just knocked my socks off. I couldn't believe it. I really couldn't believe it. Um, I was able to, really be very, very open and vulnerable, and that vulnerability was treated, with great care. Uh, and so I knew I was onto something. So wasn't too long after that that I started training to lead these weekends. Uh, and uh, and then, the model was that there are pairs, pairs of men that team up and lead the weekend. So um, uh, you know, I I had gone through the weekend, and I was starting to come more into a relationship with Paul Kachoris, who you know, and who's been on your podcast. And so Paul came and did the same weekend. He too had a mind blowing experience. And so the rest, as you said a moment ago, is history, because we have been co-leading these Victories retreat weekends for, since the early 90s. We've led over 50 some weekends.
That's amazing. Yeah, every time I hear your guys' story, it's so great, and also feels just like such a classic way that men get into this work, right? Is that some guy before them has had some experience, and it was compelling enough to go back to his friends to say, "You should come do this
Right.
with me. There's nothing wrong with you, but this is going to open some stuff up for you." Talk a little bit about that apprehension that you mentioned that you had earlier. What were some of those thoughts for you? What did it feel like? What was getting in the way?
Well, it felt foreign. It felt unfamiliar. I didn't really know much about, what goes on these weekends. But I was smart enough to know that it would involve really taking a risk on my part, and would involve, making myself vulnerable. Um, uh, those were the trepidations that I had, that um, uh, led to, my resistance or my reluctance. But in my clinical work and my professional work, um, I'm always telling, and was telling people back then, you got to get outside of your comfort zone if you want to grow. You gotta risk. You gotta push yourself if you want to evolve, if you want to move forward and expand yourself. So I, really felt like I had to practice what I was preaching.
Yeah, I love that. Kind of turn the mirror around and said the advice to yourself that you didn't
Right,
say to other
right.
people.
Yeah.
It's funny. That's almost where I love catching up with friends and being open and vulnerable about what I'm going through and what's working and what's not. Because inevitably, I say something out loud, and then I'm like, oh, I needed to say that to myself. I almost want to tell my friend, hey,
Yeah.
hey, can you say this to me? Like what I just said, just say that back to me because that would
Did
be
I
really
say that out
helpful.
loud?
I didn't know that that was here. So you go to this men's weekend, you go to the retreat, you get trained, you're doing these workshops and continue to do these workshops with Victories. What have you seen over the decades when it comes to men's work and men really starting to open up to their holistic self?
Well, um, one thing that inevitably gets said at the conclusion of one of these retreat weekends is, some guy will say, as we're wrapping up on Sunday afternoon, "You guys know more about me than my own brothers or guys I've been friends with since second grade," which is a pretty astounding thing, given that these 15 or 18 or 20 men came together on Friday evening, and nobody knew each other. It's strangers, it's all strangers. But, they've been referred, or they've been encouraged or suggested. Some guys, are in crisis, and hearing from their wives or partners, if something doesn't change, we're not going to make it. Some people just want a growth experience. They want to challenge themselves. But, we, in Victories, we've come to learn kind of the magic of, the saying from Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. So what happens is that the staff of the weekend, there's usually 2 leaders and a support staff of 8 guys who volunteer to come back. We are on site more than 24 hours before the participants arrive. And we're preparing, and we are checking in, and we're doing our own work on ourselves and talking our truth and making ourselves vulnerable with one another and being transparent. And, we laugh and cry together, and, it's blood, sweat, and tears. And that's what we call building the container. We're preparing the space to receive the participants who are coming, at 7 o'clock on Friday evening. So, we've come to learn the magic and the strength of that. And, it's often called parallel process, that, we as the staff have to walk the talk. We can't just get up and, act like we're retreat leaders and ask other people to be vulnerable if we haven't done that kind of work ourselves. So yeah, that, the preparation, the building the container, doing our own work, and it does work. I mean, I've just been privileged to see hundreds, I don't know if it's thousands, probably not thousands, but hundreds and hundreds of men have experiences that are transformative.
It's got to be an amazing, fortunate experience for you to be able to have that kind of impact on men's lives.
It really does. It's humbling, and it feels, it's an honor and a privilege. And I don't want to say that every single person has, an epiphany, and they walk out of there different people. Sometimes that does happen. But we talk about the retreat weekend as, that's one scoop out of the mountain. The work begins here. And one of our programs in Victories is called the PGG, which stands for Personal Growth Group. So after the weekend, we provide leadership for a 6-month period for this cohort of men to meet together. And, there's a specific curriculum over that 6 months, and it's, led by experienced leaders to help the group get going in the right direction, and to keep them on track, so that, they're not giving advice to each other, which men love to do, and they're not talking about sports and politics and religion. They're talking about their lives, and they're talking about their feelings, and they're talking about what they're up against, and they're supporting one another. So these groups go on, not all of them, but many, many of them go on for years and years. And we hear from guys, 10 years out, 15 years out. Yeah, the weekend was amazing. It really changed my life, and it put me on a path. But this group over the last 10 years, 15 years, some of them 20, 25 years, that's really where these guys go through life's travails together, births and deaths and marriages and divorces and victories and defeats and job gains and job losses, and they have each other, and that that really facilitates a lot of growth, and keeps men from the isolation that men often turn to when they're hurt or scared or sad.
Yeah, we love to experience these really intense and what are usually categorized as negative emotions by ourselves, which is something that it's like one of those things that I've known, but I think I really just understood recently the impact of loneliness that it can have on us and the
Mm,
disconnection that comes from
yeah.
the guilt and the shame that can come from, a lot of the things that we're talking about. I I'm curious, do you think that these groups would be as sticky and have the longevity that they've had without that retreat weekend happen? In other words, if you had just put these guys into these groups, do you think that they would be as sticky?
No, I don't. Because uh, these men shared a common experience together, and we often, and Paul may have talked about this, talking about the hero's journey. It's a Joseph Campbell story or myth of the hero's journey, or it's often also called an initiatory process that has these steps of separation from home and the familiar into the second phase, which is an ordeal, and then the return and integration. So when guys share that with one another, it really does connect them to one another in a very big and strong way. So when that cadre of men go into the personal growth group together, there's already glue. There's already some level of cohesion that only strengthens over the years. So, the answer is no. I don't think the groups would stick together or be as successful had they not shared the common experience. And back in the 80s, when a lot of there's a lot in the popular press about men's work and guys going off into the woods and dancing naked around fires and hugging trees and all that stuff, beating drums, um, and it was kind of shamed in a way. Um, but there was all this talk about male bonding, um, so that became almost a cliche, but it's true. That shared experience did and does bond men together. They
Yeah,
become comrades in arms.
absolutely. What do you I don't know how much you can share about those retreat weekends in terms of what goes on in them, but what are some of your favorite parts of the weekend maybe?
Yeah, that's a little tricky, and I don't mean to be mysterious, but Robert Bly always used to talk about don't give away the gold. Okay, if something is really unique and precious, don't go blabbing about it. There's something to be said for not giving it away. Um, that said, what I can say, and the man I referred to before, Buddy Portugal, and his co-leader Bob Mark, they wrote a book entitled "Victories of the Heart." People can read that and find out a lot of detail about what goes on in the weekends. But these are highly structured weekends. There's not a lot of downtime, where people are just, not really involved in anything. It's fairly structured, and men come, and we have some processes, some kind of ritual processes that kind of induct men into the weekend in ways that we welcome them and encourage them and impress upon them that uh, we've been waiting for them and preparing the space, and you know there will be no coercion, there will be no shaming, no one will have to do anything they don't want to do. They're not giving up their rights. We do uh, some modeling. We teach some communication styles that are called levels of communication. Um, and then this isn't secret here. The leaders will do a demonstration where they sit in the middle of the room, and the entire group, staff and participants, kind of fishbowl them. They get around them, and they go through a process of demonstrating 4 different levels of communication with one another. From 1 being the most superficial to level 4 being the most in-depth, authentic and vulnerable. And that's always a very powerful part of the weekend because, again, we're demonstrating, we're walking the talk, we're making ourselves vulnerable in front of these guys. And that really tends to set the weekend in motion. And then, the bulk of the next day, there are opportunities for men to step up and what we call do a piece of work, a piece of heart work that is spontaneous. It's tailored. We follow. We don't lead, and we assist them in any ways that they are presenting to us that would be helpful. Yeah, so that's kind of what I feel comfortable revealing about the weekend.
Fair enough. Well, I hope to be able to attend one of these weekends when I know you guys are doing them virtually right now, but when they get back up and running in person, and then we can have a follow-up session debrief without giving away the gold.
We
talking
would
through it would be
love
fun.
we would love to have you, Adam. It'd really be an honor to have you join us. Paul and I are shooting for. We always do June. We just do one weekend a year, and last June was out. Obviously, this June ain't going to happen. We're shooting for June of 2022.
Oh, that's right. I remember him saying that. Okay.
Yeah,
I'll put it
because
on
I
the
think
books now.
yeah, by then we'll probably be able to have in-person, weekends.
Yeah, very cool. Well, let's switch gears a little bit. I want to get into kind of what you're seeing these days with the young adult men in your practice and more broadly. I know that you love everybody that you work with, but you've got a special place for the young adult men that you get to do some work with. So I'd just be curious, what's coming up for them these days, and what are some trends that you're seeing?
Yeah, well, a lot of the young men that come to work with me in my practice are, they're struggling with things that are, I think, appropriate to their level of development. Identity, career, intimacy versus isolation. Am I going to go through this life solo, or am I going to find a relationship? And where do I fit in this world? And the certainly a lot of young men are they don't understand the power and the strength that's involved in vulnerability. They've been programmed like many of us. I think this is changing in the culture. I do see it changing. But that the kind of classic "be tough, don't let them see you sweat, big boys don't cry," all those old adages. So there's something that that's unique about the psychotherapy setting, because it's safe, it's quiet, and it's a process where hopefully a young man experiences me as someone who cares about them, and someone that can be trusted. And one of the things that I love about working with men in that age bracket, from say 19 to 25, 28, somewhere in there, is that in addition to a kind of conventional, straightforward psychotherapy treatment for whatever they're bringing, anxiety, depression, family strife, substance dependence or abuse, issues of sexuality. Um, so in addition to those things, which are kind of standard topics in therapy, I also find myself doing a fair amount of mentoring and coaching and encouraging them, and kind of guidance counseling. And if I see a strength in somebody, and this doesn't just go for young men, this I think with everybody, but since we're talking about young men, um, if I see a strength, I admire it, and I encourage it, and try and help them see that in themselves. And when people identify these strengths in themselves and these areas of interest, and I try and help people uncover what their passions are, and um, you know, when that spark gets lit and it starts to heat up, and I kind of fan those flames and blow on the embers and get that fire going, it can help really send them in the direction that they need to go, or that they wanna go. So it's that combination of therapy and mentorship, and I think also I think young men need to be um, seen by older men. I think they need to be acknowledged and admired, and encouraged. So there's a healthy dose of that takes place. Um, uh, I'll share a little anecdote. I was in um, it's kind of a peer consultation group. A group of professionals who get together now and then, just talk about themselves or their practices, or maybe talk about a case. And I was attending one of these, and I was kind of new to it. I didn't really know the people very well. But we were talking about our areas of interest, and I got talking about this, and I said, yeah, God, with these young guys, I just love them through it. I just love them through this stage of their development. And I got some, I don't know if I got looks or I thought that I got looks, but it's one of those things like, did I just say that out loud? Because a lot of people are still, I've loosened up a whole lot in how I conduct myself, and how I talk about therapy and how I act in therapy, and in ways that feel just right on for me. But a lot of my colleagues are still very, very formal, and they come out of that more traditional psychoanalytic, psychodynamic model. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I found in my career trying to cram myself into that just didn't work, and I was not really able to utilize a lot of who I am and what I had to offer.
Yeah, that's cool. It's almost like you've been able to pull in a lot of your own personal life experiences, with being able to open up and embrace vulnerability and acknowledging for people who they are, not just taking a purely clinical approach to taking care of patients, and seeing that, yeah, we've got this one thing that, or many things potentially that they're here for, but we're dealing with the whole human here, and we have
Yes,
to look at it
yes.
that way.
Yeah, and I think if you're not in it with them, you're doing them a disservice, or you're not serving them well. Carl Whitaker, famous uh, family therapist pioneer from University of Wisconsin, said you got to get your guts into it,
Mm.
and that there's a lot of truth to that. And I was talking to a young, I feel emotional about this right now. Um, Talking to a young man today who's 21-ish, and been working with him for the last year. And he, I won't get into a lot of details, but he said something about, yeah, but I've never had to, uh, never had the experience of doing this stuff, the things we're talking about him needing to do alone. And I said, "You're not alone." I said, I'm with you in this.
Oh, so powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's such a funny thing that we do as guys. Like we think that we have to be these lone wolves. We got to do it on our own, and we can't, be vulnerable and ask for
Yeah.
help. And
Yeah.
God, it just makes us so damn lonely.
Yeah. I isolate, I'm surprised that loneliness isn't in the DSM-5.
I mean, we would all be diagnosed with that at this point in
Yeah,
time.
because I hesitate to call it a disease, but it's as harmful as a disease.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've
And
seen,
isolation too.
yeah, there's some of the stats that I've seen about loneliness, and I forget the exact number, so I'm not going to try to quote it, but it was comparing the impact of loneliness on our bodies to the equivalent of smoking X number of packs of cigarettes a day. And it's just like, oh wow, if you think about being alone as, housing a couple packs a day, like that really starts to put things in perspective. And there's a great book that I'm in the middle of right now. I think it's called Together by the former, I know now he's the US Surgeon General again, Vivek Murthy wrote
Huh.
it. And it's all about his journey as a physician treating patients' bodies and then realizing that at the root of it, a lot of these things was loneliness. And he tells all these great stories about, people with everything from cancer and eating disorders and depression and
Yeah.
PTSD and all this stuff. There just ends up being this commonality of loneliness that ironically bonds all those stories together, but yet exacerbates all these things. And so we go and we treat what's on the surface when at the end of the day we could all just use a little bit more connection.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, the loneliness and isolation lead to depression. And, I think loneliness and isolation really compromise our immune systems. Uh, and very, very detrimental. I don't know all the physiology and the biology of it, but I know that happens.
Yeah. I mean, I just speaking for myself, I know the impact that it has on me. And uh, just a quick anecdote over on my side from this week. Monday, I was in a real rough and raw place when I woke up in the morning. I started off my morning thinking that my wife had possibly been abducted. Just to
Oh
give you an
God.
idea of like where my head was at. She had told me the previous day about feeling like she was watched in the parking lot at the gas station, and I woke up and it was dark outside and she wasn't in bed. And I thought first maybe she was letting the dog out, and then she didn't come back to bed, and I was just like, oh my God, something happened to her. And it was Monday, and she goes and teaches our fitness class every single Monday morning. But my brain was just in that state, and then woke up, I wasn't feeling myself and trying to get myself going, and I turn on the shower, and then I just got overwhelmed with emotion and just stood in the middle of my bathroom and just started crying. And I was like, I feel lost. I feel disconnected. I'm not sure what I'm doing, where I'm going next. And, talk to my wife, and she helps me kind of get to the state. And I decide I need to go get some exercise, kind of move through this. And I was supposed to talk with a friend at that point in time. And my first reaction was like, I can't call him. I can't tell him how I'm really doing right now. Like, I'm way too raw. For somebody as open as I proclaim myself to be, in that moment, I didn't feel like I could do it. And to your point earlier about if you do the same thing that you've been doing, you don't expect different results. And I was like, you know what? My ego's telling me not to call him. I'm just going to call him and see what happens. And I called him and we connected, and turns out he'd been in a very similar place, and we just had that bond. And I was like,
Yeah.
I'm so glad granted, my wife was there the whole time, but then I had this other connection too. And I was like, this is why, like, we don't have to do these things on our own.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, the power of connection.
There it is. It keeps showing up. But it's so funny that the initial reaction, at least for me, is like, oh, I'm not ready to talk about this with other people. Like, I need to keep this to myself until I'm ready. Which just perpetuates that feeling of I got to do it by myself. I got to figure this out. I got to fix it. I got to be a man. I got to be strong.
Mhm.
that feels like a disease. It's like that's the programming that I wish I could just like, you'd plug into the matrix and just have it get sucked right out.
Well, I think you're on your way out of it. Yeah, I
We'll
really
see.
had a,
We'll see. It's a continuous journey as you've shared with us.
all indications are you're well on your way out.
Yeah. 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 We'll see. We'll check back in and see how it's really going. Well, what do you see for the future of men in general? Maybe you want to focus on, young men and kind of where we're heading. You notice that you've seen some changes in the culture and in the world. Are you optimistic about what's ahead for guys in our mental health and masculinity? What are you thinking?
Boy, I vacillate um, um, between optimism and pessimism. I think what I've seen in the culture over the last 4 years, I find very discouraging, and I know that that kind of macho, tough guy, um, uh, you know, insulting. I could come up with lot more adjectives, but that can appeal to a lot of young men. They can get hooked by that. Oh, that's tough. I'm going to be a tough guy like him. And I find that very, very discouraging. Um, the other side of that coin is, when Paul and I lead a victories weekend, um, it's very encouraging, to see the possibility um, that gets realized when men come together in a safe place and they support each other and they encourage each other and they honor each other's strengths and weaknesses. So that's very encouraging. That's why I've been in it as many years as I have. Um, so that's very encouraging. And I think culturally also I've seen some shifts in much more acceptance uh, on the part of the part of men who've maybe had a college experience. They get exposed to a whole variety of different kinds of people and different ideas about how to be not just a man, but how to be human. Um, and that's not, that's come a long way from where things were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So it depends on what day you catch me on, whether I'm feeling optimistic or pessimistic. But I tend toward the optimism by my character structure.
That sounds about right. That sounds about right. Well, I'd love for you to leave us with one tip, piece of advice, piece of wisdom for the people that are listening for how to take care of themselves or what you think is coming in the future. What do you want to leave everybody with?
Oh boy, I don't know. I'm wasn't prepared to that. I put on the spot to come up with something very wise and sage. I don't know how if I can summon that up. Uh, well, certainly be willing to risk, uh, be willing to move into the areas that scare you. Pema Chodron wrote a book. She's written a number of books, but she's a terrific author, American Buddhist nun. But one of them is The Places That Scare You. That's the title. And, you know, that our growth comes from getting outside of the comfort zone. And I think it's important for people to realize that and challenge themselves that way, because otherwise, there's stasis. And conversely, when we challenge ourselves, when we risk, that's dynamic. That you know provides some energy that propels us forward.
Well, thank you
So
for
that's the
that.
best. That's the best I can do on the spur of the moment. But it wasn't too bad, was it?
No, it's great. It's great. It was the right thing. Whatever came to you was the exact right thing to share in that moment. And I Pema hasn't been called out yet, but I'm glad that you did, because she was somebody that's got me through some dark times with her writing and her videos for sure.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah. Her listening to her wisdom and some of her guided meditations, some of her talks, her books. The therapist that I worked with for a really long time was a big fan and exposed me to her, and I am forever grateful.
I had the privilege of attending a retreat that she taught several
Oh,
years
wow.
ago out at Carmicholing in Vermont. So I had the experience of being in her presence, but her books have sustained me, in difficult times. One title in particular, When Things Fall Apart.
Yep, that's the one.
Yeah.
That is the one. Well, I'll put her on my bucket list of people to, if I could ever interview her, that would be
Would
the
be
one.
terrific.
Yeah.
You better do it soon, though. She's getting on in years, and I understand her health isn't that great.
I know. God, I got some work to do. All right. We've always got things to aspire to. And like you just said, we have to do things that make us uncomfortable and take some risks. So I'll just email her team tomorrow and see what happens.
Cool.
Well, thanks for so much for being here tonight with me, man. It's been a joy to chat.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. I really appreciate the invitation and your great questions, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing. And don't stop. It's important and it's necessary.
I appreciate that. Yeah, we've got lots of work to do and lots of men's lives to impact, so they can then go out and impact the communities and lives that they care and love about as well.
All right.
All right. Well, we'll talk again soon. Thanks for being here.
Okay. Peace.
All right. See you, man.
Thanks for listening to The Mandate with your host, Adam Hoffman. It's time to do your part in raising awareness of men's mental health, shifting the stigma, and having a positive impact on someone's life. Share this episode with a friend who could use some support and post it on your social channels. Have questions or thoughts? Text Adam at 512-980-3935. Find more episodes, upcoming live shows, and life-changing resources at mandateshow.com. Your mandate is to take your mental health seriously. Be courageous, stay vulnerable, live authentically. Until next time, y'all.